about what does it take to really deploy those at scale. And then you'll get a little bit of a CEO's perspective on why DevOps is important. And if your managers aren't thinking it's important, or your leadership is, then you should probably hint to them it is really, really important if they're going to scale their business. So why am I here? I'm a recovering consultant. I've spent a lot of time in technology. If you were here to see the actor Ben Savage, I'm sorry, you've got me instead. I am notorious for breaking people's demos. Just my presence in a room or on the phone will cause most people's demos to go south. I don't know how or why. I have actually blown boards in front of customers. So if you ever see the magic smoke come out of a computer, it's not good, but it is possible. But the last 10 years, I've really been focusing on leading teams from an innovation perspective as a chief innovation officer, focusing on product and operations, and now running a business. I'll say innovation's a lot more fun if you can just do that, but being able to be operationally capable and helping people actually execute what they talk about from innovation, so it sets apart someone from just being the average consultant who comes in to someone who can do a lot more and build really, really cool products. And I would say that about anyone who's joined my team or anyone who's thinking about it, you should think about being able to do that. So first, I'm going to start with some definitions, because we live in this world where everyone has heard the word AI, and they think it's either the Terminator, or they think it's the best thing ever, or somewhere in between. But what people don't realize is that it covers a broad spectrum. And I say this from dealing with customers, where I've had customers say, hey, I need AI to go solve a problem. And then you start talking about what do they need. They think ChatGPT or large language models. But a lot of times you can do that with conventional machine learning. And so I'm going to start by just saying, what's the difference between the two? So people can think about that, because I've had customers come in and say they need the brightest technology to, oh no, we can't use any AI. These are customers I've worked with for years. And all of a sudden now you can't use basic machine learning and pattern recognition and all these things that make products better and make them smarter. They're going, you can't use them because they're so afraid of what we've seen from the Gen AI perspective. So when I think about conventional machine learning, I think about things that are one, deterministic. They always give you the same result. They may be trained, or they may be supervised or unsupervised, but they're highly, highly repeatable and verifiable and provable for what you're going to do. So if you think about finance, right, you think about fraud detection, you're not necessarily training that each instance is a bad transaction, but you're training on those patterns. So I can say, hey, there's something out of the norm. Let's go look at that. Or think about for image recognition, whether it's license plate recognition or detection of cancer in an image, or any number of the cases where people use it for people detection. The deterministic and repeatable natures of those are super, super key. So that's kind of where I like to start with it. Then I start talking about Gen AI. So this is where you start to get to non-deterministic patterns, right? So this is stuff that's based on generative transformers, or might be generative adversarial networks. So that's what generative pre-trained transformers, what GPT stands for. And think about those. And those are really, really cool tools for taking existing data and either surfacing new insight out of it, or sometimes some very random hallucinations. But if you've ever played with those tools, what you realize is, as you put your prompt in, you can click regenerate, right? It's going to give you a slightly different answer every time, because they're non-deterministic. These are all based off Bayesian statistics. So it starts off at the top, goes through several billion parameters. So when you hear the B, that's the number of parameters in the model usually. And it's going to have some differences, because there's no way to get it to go exactly the same. So it's all about probability. It's also why they tend to hallucinate. If you go ask a model a question, it doesn't have any data in its model, in its training set, it's going to try and find the nearest approximation. So if I ask it a question about how to make an apple pie, it might give me a whole story about dinosaurs, because it just is what it thinks is statistically appropriate for the question I've put in. So when we think about these, the other thing I tend to think about a lot for both of them, and I'm going to talk mostly about Gen AI, but for machine learning, is what is the data security? And data security I also will widely use to talk about privacy, right, or ownership. Because as a business, if someone is using this, you've got to think about, if someone is using an algorithm, are they using my data to train it? What rights do I have to it? And is it going to leak data from my business? So those are all things to think about. So that could be leaking your code. So if you're trying to do a startup and you've got a great new idea, you don't want that code leaking out, and maybe you don't want it training GitHub and what it's doing, so that it makes it easier for someone else to do the same thing. So that's one of the differences between what a person can do and what these transformer models can do. Is transformer models will build data off of what they've already seen. These people can go create sometimes good ideas, sometimes bad ideas, but we can all create things that have never been seen in the world. So when I think about security, I start looking at two things. One, am I just concerned about maintaining the ownership of the data? Or am I worried about making sure that I'm also having not just the data I put in, but control the prompts and the results that come out of it afterwards? So if I look at a lot of the hosted models, if you dig into their terms of service, I know we always never do that. You just scroll down to the bottom and click I agree, but those are important from a business perspective. So if I look at the ones for OpenAI and I'm using a hosted or licensed Open API, let's say that fast. If I'm using a licensed Open API, using a licensed OpenAI Open API, depending on what my agreement with them is, they may have rights to the responses. That's a way you can leak data from your business. Other challenge in those cases sometimes is they may change the model on you. You may not be able to control that absolutely. It doesn't mean using a hosted solution is bad. If you look at some of the ones from Amazon or some of the ones from Microsoft and use their versions, you have a little bit more control on how it's going than if you just go and say OpenAI directly or Anthropic or someone else. And then there's a whole other class if you want to run it locally, the open source models. Those have some different licensing things you need to take into account. But what they do is give you the ability to control when a model is deployed, so it never gets updated unless you want to do it. And then it does make sure that nobody else has access to your prompts, to your data, or to its responses. So they're all trade-offs that you got to think about. And I didn't warn you before, but I've got a little bit of ADD, and that shows up in my presentations. So sometimes we kind of push the bounds of what you can do with technology. And we were sitting in a meeting and we were actually talking a lot about QA. I think it was about a 2-hour meeting on a QA subject that going on for too long. And the ADD kicked in. Someone had their chickens on their farm get loose, and that's what happened. And all of a sudden, we start joking about a band name, the Colonel and Chicken Smugglers. We're from Ohio. KFC is from Kentucky down the way, so Colonel Sanders is fairly present in most people's minds. And we realized this is in 2023. You could come pretty close to creating a band. So we've got an image of the band up there. We've got the name. The next thing is, can you do lyrics? Lyrics at that point were really, really easy with OpenAI. You'll put in something and say, give me lyrics on this. And I think we determined they were a vegan hardcore band. That's what they did. Don't ask us why that's what we came up with, but that's what we did. And we tried the first song. And this is one I was using UberDuck for. UberDuck is one of the early tools to go create AI music. It's okay.
Woke up this morning, sunlight's going in the heartland where the roosters are warning.
It's okay. It's not great, but it's not so bad you scream my ears are bleeding. But this is what we could do a year later. So that's what happened in just a year. And I just redid some of this on Friday, actually. How many of you guys have read Douglas Adams? Have you ever read Holistic Detective Agency? Remember the piece of software called Anthem? You could turn your company's spreadsheets into a theme song for your band. You can actually do that now. I've not included it here because I've had a chance to update my deck, but we went through the Microsoft annual report. We asked it to provide us a summary of the annual report, convert those into lyrics, and that turned into actually a fairly surprising pop rock song. It also gives you something to think about. If you're going to work with these tools, how do you make sure they're prompted, they're responding in ways that are appropriate for the context you're working with? I.e., if I'm working with medical records, I probably shouldn't be able to prompt it to give me a rock song of a patient's diagnosis. It may not work. But it shows you some of the power of these tools. So when I start to think about it, I think about how do I apply these to the real world? Because it's a lot of fun to create these tools and think about what you can do with them. But from my perspective as a CEO, it's all got to come back to this, right? There's got to be something we can turn into a business case or a business model or help a customer create business value. That's how we get paid. Our business gets paid, that's how my employees get. So this is an example of actually a real product that we have. How many of you guys have been to a Little Caesars in the last year or two? Have you seen the pizza portal? The metal device you can go scan your phone? So our team built that. This is a derivative of what we put in that system. That system is a little more challenging. That's about 140 degrees, so I can't put a sensor into it because most sensors will melt unless I'm using automotive grade, and then they get a little pricey. So this is another version that we have, so you never have to wait. And in this case, we're using cameras as the object detection mechanism because we know that the different kinds of items that we put in, they're going to vary in size, they're going to vary by customer. So we need a way to update that without having to go redesign the system every time we need to change the sensors. So it sounds simple. We use image-based object detection. Well, now it starts to get a little more complicated because I'm going to have 31 cameras per assistant. So I have 31 compartments per assistant. The reason we've got 31 is that one of the spaces is always taken for a user interface screen. Now I start thinking about that. I'm starting to deploy hundreds of these systems across the world. And I do mean across the world. Our first prototypes were deployed in the Philippines, in South Africa, and in somewhere in the middle of the vortex. Oh, yeah, it was during the pandemic, so we couldn't actually get people to go look at these devices either, but now it's a lot easier. So this became really, really critical to say, one, we need something that's highly predictable. So we chose conventional machine learning. So we need to have a repeatable algorithm that didn't change unless we wanted it to. And then the next piece was, how do I start scaling and managing all of that? So that's where we had to go build the infrastructure we're going to go see next. So this is where we're using Kubernetes. And we're doing some things that are a little bit different with Kubernetes than most people. That our edge cluster, our edge devices, as we deploy hundreds of these edge devices and thousands, are actually all part of one cluster of our cloud. So the cloud are the master nodes, but we have all these edges. So for those of you who've done the networking in Kubernetes, you realize that there's some complexity there we took on. I won't say kilo is a four-letter word, but it's the merit some days. And then we had to think about how do we build the rest of the infrastructure to deploy application updates, Flux. How do we manage the machine learning model and make sure that gets updated and pushed out? And we didn't go to Kubeflow yet, but we'll talk about that in a bit. And this is a real world case. So this has hundreds of devices. We have some of these where students are using them, or in other applications where you'll see 3,000 transactions a day go through one device. So they're pretty high volume. And when I'm talking about transactions, these are IoT transactions at the edge. If someone's going in, requesting permission to do something, getting real-time permission back. So it's not just reading sensor data. So another use case that we've looked at and that we've worked on with some customers is how do you deal with unstructured data? This is where I really, really like LLMs. Because in a lot of cases, when you think about them, they're kind of like search and autocorrect on steroids. Because you can ask it to do summaries, ask it to go find data. So if you don't know what's in there, it's a lot easier for some people to think about how to ask questions on it than the right SQL queries if they're familiar with it. So this particular customer had been, they had had the opportunity to get the archives of a radio host. The radio host had passed away, but they had probably 10 or 15 years of archives. So they knew who the person was being interviewed. They knew the date of the interview, but they didn't know anything else about what was on this. So we were able to help them transcribe, and they're going to create tools for them to go search through that data so they can start to find out what stories are here. Because the person who did all the interviews and remembered all that passed away. So that's a use case. So, and there, determinism, having it be completely repeatable is a little less important in some cases, but you have to think of that, right? Because you can't have it making up fictional stories. We've all seen those headlines about the lawyer who goes and searches on OpenAI or something, and it's created a whole bunch of fake cases and stuff that probably wasn't what it was supposed to be. So this, by the way, is one of my favorite slides my team has come up with because I found it really cool with the dinosaur and the spaceship. But this is where I'm talking a little bit about Kubeflow, because Kubernetes has all the stuff that we normally think about for container management, but we built Kubeflow, and there's a couple of new pieces they're coming out with to really help for those AI models, for pushing them out, for maintaining the version. And if you're using this in a business context, that version control of the model, knowing it's not changing or know it's really when it's changing is really, really important. Because if a customer support team or someone is using it, and today they get answer A, and tomorrow they get answer B, because you updated the model, you better be able to tell them why. So that's kind of where I'm going to end my talk about that. Now I'm going to get into the business aspect of it. So as you think about this from a business leader, a business manager, someone who's going to start out their own business, Somebody's got the next best startup idea. Think about how you're going to scale things, how you're going to make things repeatable, and how you're going to make sure that you're managing the cost of the system. Because one of the things that's really easy with any of the AI type stuff or anything in the cloud, I'm sure we've all heard of cases where someone doesn't watch their scaling and all of a sudden their costs go from $5 a month to $5,000 a month. Or in our case, we had an issue with text messaging because we use, everybody uses a service like Twilio or something like that to do it. And there did a piece of the software that went wrong. And how many messages did you get, Ed? You got more than 5. Yeah. It was more than 5,000. I think it was $5,000. $5,000 worth of text messages. Like one message at 10 cents a piece. So it gives you an idea of the volume. And he didn't say anything, by the way. So that was, we had a conversation about that. You got to figure out how you have those controls, right? So your system is alerting you to that. That's where the DevOps come in. That's where the auto scaling, but also the reporting and the analytics, whether you Elk Stack or Datadog or Sumo Logic or whichever particular tool you choose to monitor it. But they're really, really critical to your ability to scale. The other thing that comes in is how do you make sure that you've got resilience in your system? So you know when things are going right and when things are going wrong, and the ability to have that durability across. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're in multi-zone, but you may need to be multi-instance, you may need to have different locations, and you want to have that go up rapidly. Because you don't want to tell your customers, oh, everything went down, we'll be up in 10 days. That's painful if you ever have to tell customers that. We've seen cases in the real world where things go wrong with that, right? It can be as simple as a misconfigured BTP sends people into a spin for at least a number of hours, if not a number of days. So, sorry, Caroline, try not to look at my slides, but I don't want to memorize. So I'm a big fan of building everything in Terraform or whatever you want to use. So choose your infrastructure as code as a choice, whether it's Terraform or OpenTofu or don't choose Chef, please. I've got scars from that one. I think it was a tool that actually made me angry, so I was trying to figure out how they configure and set it up. But choose an automation tool, right? So you can go to this. That gets to the resilience and scalability, it gets to the cost, it gets to the supportability. It gets to all that. But the other piece I'm going to talk about, I'm going to shift to things that probably A, get told as stories by developers, and B, managers tend to overlook, or leaders tend to overlook, which is the importance of testing, whether it's automated testing or manual, to make sure that, preferably automated, by the way, because the number of developers I have swear they automate all their test cases. And then you find out that, yeah, see, exactly, you know. But that's one of the things you got to think about, because if you automate it once, you can make sure that you're continually doing that testing, and you're less likely to be surprised by something. But that gets into the next two pieces, right? Having documented playbooks and practicing them. Because every time someone is done to do a deployment, in my experience, where they said, we got it, it's easy, no problems. That's where I wake up and find there's someone who's still up at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. on a deploy that was supposed to start at 9 p.m. And it's gone very south. And I'm sure you guys have all been there, right? But things do go wrong. But so how do you practice it? How do you know when you should roll out? Right? So you're watching that time clock and you're okay, we hit the point of no return, we got to go forward. Or hey, 1 minute till we hit the point of no return, so let's roll it back because there's something not going right. And then when you're doing that practice, someone needs to go unleash the chaos, right? Whether you're using one of the tools like Chaos Monkey or Gremlin or all those different tools that will inject intentional faults in, but think about how you're going to practice for when it goes wrong, not just when it goes right. So that was really quick, but what questions does everyone have?
Where does security fit in all of this?
So security fits in a couple of different ways. One is everywhere, I guess is the right term for it, right? From your code development practices to your operating system deployments to the way you've got your infrastructure, and then making sure that you've got all the appropriate firewalls, and preferably you're using some kind of automated vulnerability scaling system so you're doing that. Then for the Gen AI perspective, which is kind of what I started talking about, there you're gonna have to do some specialist guardrails and things. There are some libraries that are out there. Some of that you're gonna have to be doing a lot of prompt testing and figure out where you need to put those guardrails. Some of them are built into the models, but a lot of it you're gonna have to, it almost becomes in some ways more like an expert system by the time you're done, because you've created guardrails so it can't either paraphrase things in song or say things that are completely offensive. I know it's a general answer, but it's a good question, right? Because you need to start thinking about that from the time you start planning what you're going to do, not after you built everything, or it's on that website.
Say rigorous testing is kind of the best way to prepare for that.
Rigorous testing, but with the right tools, right? Because the way most people do QA testing, that's not going to find a lot of the security, right? So that's where you're gonna have to look at whether it's SonarQube or I'm gonna forget all the different things out there. Gremlin was one I mentioned earlier. There's tons and tons of open source projects and applications you can purchase. And what they will do is they will scan your code for known vulnerabilities, so like CVSSs. I think I got that set up backwards, right? It will start to do fuzzing. It will look for SQL injection, for cross-site scripting, for the whole OWASP type things. That's the basics you want. And then there's other tools that can go more in depth because they've had other, I get a little hazy on some of the new AI tools that they're starting to use to do some of the detection just because I haven't seen how they're verifiable yet. But it's a little different than normal user testing because most users aren't as devious as they need to be. That's the challenge.
You mentioned some risk case earlier. Is there like a situation or where the risk would be too great to implement a system like this?
I would say it's not that it's too great to implement a system, it's to make sure you choose the right technology. So let's say we're doing something in websites. That's a space my team spends a lot of time in. There are a lot of cases where I would not use a large language model because it's not going to be repeatable enough to do it. Particularly if, let's say, it's around drug use or patient treatment methods. Because that, I want to make sure it's absolutely verifiable, absolutely best practice. And I don't want to risk a model going off and making something up that it shouldn't. On the other hand, there's a lot of cases where you should use conventional machine learning because that is very well understood. There are ways to make it repeatable and consistent. And sometimes I think that's overlooked because the problem is they think you need more data than you need, or it's going to take more time to clean and train the data that you need to go. So I always start with matching the technology to the use case. And sometimes you've got to choose an older technology that's not as cool or sexy, but is well known and understood for the application. Yeah, if you think about aircraft, right? They now use Linux, but they use a very specific safety critical version that is hard time real code. So if you've ever done anything in Linux, you know that its timing can be a little iffy sometimes. So there are special versions that are super repeatable in the way they do things that you would use for that.
So where do you see AI playing a major role, like in DevOps in the future? And where do you see its most impact in the near future and then maybe long term?
So I think there's some really cool stuff I've seen both my teams and others start to do just for debugging errors. When you get that error message from a stack, you're like, what the heck is this? We've all, someone gives you a 15 meg log for something or looking for one specific event. You really want to read through all those lines of text? No, that's where some of these tools can be helpful. And that's where the summarization comes in, right? It's finding the pattern. That's stuff that they're pretty consistent about. As a human, you need to use it intelligently and not just overly trust the computer. So I think that's one. I think you're seeing one of the better use cases for generation from large language models is code. Because code is fairly consistent and repeatable the way people do it. It's not like, how do I create the next great American novel, which that's dependent on who's writing it. Code it's an artificially constructed language. It has some pretty significant limits, some pretty good definitions on what those groups are. So there's some pretty good stuff that's coming with that. And then I think as you get to the ability to have some of the alerting and things like that interacting with things, it'll probably go there. I think in the long run, you're going to see much more of that. People learning how to use this to build some of those complex systems, or I don't know how many, if any of you are familiar with the term yak shading, the boring tasks that we all have to do that are really no fun. Put something in a database, remove something, update something in a database, delete it, to help with those kind of boring things so we can get to the really interesting algorithms. Because we've got to build an interface, right? Someone's going to be able to use the software, but we probably don't really care about that. We care about the really cool algorithm, the problem we're solving way in the back that has 15 different math components, is requiring trigonometry, is requiring all this stuff that no one else has thought through. but it's really interesting. And the reality is no users don't care that we've done all that, as long as it's easy for them to use. So it makes it easier to go through those pieces, and then makes it easier for the design team to have to worry less about learning how to code on the phone and focus on the feel. That's
So there's kind of an elephant in the room whenever you talk about artificial intelligence, and that is, at what point does it start taking over the work of developers who are creating software? So I guess, A, what are your thoughts on that? And B, as I'm sure there's a bunch of developers and system administrator type folks in the room, what can we do to?
So I think it changes it in some ways, right? It doesn't mean it's going to replace developers or sysadmins. It may take over the simpler tasks. So they need to figure out how to be more efficient, and it may drive us to go and look into more arcane things, right? So think about when you're getting into it. I was talking with one of my guys about setting up a large language model question. So, okay, so I can go buy an A100, or I can go find a much less expensive one and get them on a video RAM to go through. So how do you go figure out and configure that system? I haven't seen AI tools that are going to be able to figure out some of that complexity. Maybe they will, but the reality is they're not going to do it until we teach them that. And then by that next thing we'll be doing is figure out something more creative and something different. So I think you need to understand them. They're not always going to be the right tool. I wouldn't be afraid of them, but I would be working to continually build my skill base and understand how to do the things that they're going to be weak in, so I can use. I can't tell you what they're going to be weak in, because every time I turn around, someone's got a new model that does something of different levels of capability. So work with them, figure out how to be smarter. At this point, they don't think. And that's what a lot of the articles say. But if you play with them enough, they don't think.
You think, like right now, they're really great, but a lot of us use Stack Overflow and Reddit and got all our answers from Google searches. Is there a negative impact where now we're not going there? So, and that's where these learning models are getting their information. Is there a risk that they're not going to learn anything new because no one's going there anymore? Or do you think there's always?
I think you're right there. In some ways, that reminds me of like the early days of open source, right? Like I set up an Asterisk server, which is an open source IP phone system. Did that 14 years ago. Kind of kills me to say it that long. I still had to use ISA cards to talk to the T1 card, to talk to the T1 nodes. And at that point, Stack Overflow wasn't really what it is today. There was very little documentation. So, and that was when open source in that case kind of had the call it the learning cliff. If you got to a certain level, they would do a few answers, but you had to really prove yourself to get to the top of the cliff before they would really help you. And once I figured out how to get the ISA card talking to that damn T1 through my phone provider, and spent a horrible amount of time to get all that sorted, then people would give me answers. I worry a little bit that some of this is going to happen where information is in more silos like that. And you're kind of seeing that now, right? Because Reddit has gone and blocked themselves, so only Google can index them. Stack Overflow, I don't know what they're doing. I think they're probably doing something similar. So I'm trying to figure out how to monetize it. So the question is, where do these communities evolve, and where do people continue to share this information so that new folks can get started in it too? So I worry about the silo.
What would you say are some of the greatest weaknesses that AI has right now?
Specifically Gen AI or all?
I'd like to hear both of those answers.
So for conventional machine learning, a lot of the weakness have to come in, particularly if its model has to be trained. So there's how do you get the data organized, how do you get it tagged, and how do you go form that training? That tagging process, it's one of those under talked about secrets that particularly on Amazon and some of those tools, we're paying people very little amounts of money to kind of do lots of training with data. That's kind of what some of the tools are, where they keep asking these stupid questions: is it a stoplight or not? We're using that to train on imagery sometimes, because you got to build those data sets. They have to be very, very large to make some of the models work. So I think continuing to do that, and if you don't do it right, you get Tesla and their self-driving cars that are always self-driving and miss things because they come into unexpected circumstances. I think for large language models, The biggest weakness is the fact that they can't be made deterministic, right? You can't guarantee they're always gonna come back with the same answer or the same thing. I think people underestimate the complexity it takes to get good results from those tools. I quite frankly don't use large language models, let me write, because I can write faster than asking me a bunch of questions, spending a lot of time prompt engineering and like editing it. I'll just write the document. But that's, everyone has different skills, right? That's where we talk about how do you make sure that you're going to stay on top of and ahead of what the AI is doing, is knowing where your strengths are and continue to develop those. So, but I think the weakness is people are overestimating LLMs right now, just how consistent they are. Yeah, so ChatGPT, Stable Diffusion, Midjourney, Suno, Udio, Anthropic, Mistral. You keep going. All those tools that you're hearing about that are really fuzzy right now, those are all generative. They're all based on that generative pre-trained transformer concept, whether they're for image or for output, or for
And then the other one was a machine learning?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you mean exactly that?
The best two examples I can think of would be if you've ever had a financial fraud alert come in. That is a conventional machine learning model that is based on a supervised training. They're training it on here are the scenarios that it could be, and then when it sees a scenario that matches one of those, it flags it as an exception. You know, hey, look, there's some number of transactions that might be based on the idea of impossible fraud. Today you were in, I don't know what that was, but today right now you're in Cincinnati, and tomorrow you were, 5 minutes you're in. It's going to say it's impossible travel, might be a VPN, but it might be someone's trying to duplicate your card. The other would be like a mess, how it burns and adjusts to your temperature based on it. So,
Well, you design it in a way so it doesn't hallucinate a lot. There's no like it's going to want to ask a question because you do the wrong answer, you just sure that that's the right answer.
there's a couple ways to mitigate it. You can use retrieval augmented generation. So that's where you're taking a bunch of data, you're creating embeddings, you're not necessarily retraining the model on your data, but using it to enrich the data that's there. And that's where you tend to see cases where if people are doing it in a corporate scenario where it's referring to specific corporate documents. You can also do embedding or other retraining or fine tuning of the models where you're continuing to add data. Some of those you can run the risk, like with any machine learning model, where you overtrain it, and it may not be good for some tasks. It only can get really good in a specific way. Well, you can overtrain it. Yeah, you see that almost more with some of the image ones where they're trying to train it to give a consistent character, and they can't get it to give any other characters than the one they trained.
If you have to work with any auditors for like SOC 2, Type 2, or PCI, and if so, how are they viewing you integrating these kinds of things?
I have not done that with any of these yet, and I still have scars from my last PCI 2 audit, PCI audit. So I've learned to avoid that one if possible.
Just a comment about weaknesses for Gen AI is it doesn't understand control. So I tested this out. I was trying to remove a package from the Linux system, and it told me to do RF/RF/. That's it.
Well, remember where a lot of these were trained, right? To that point, they were trained on Reddit, they were trained on 4chan, they were trained on places.
That'll work. It'll work. More than part.
But that's why it's also important, right? Because every model is going to respond different. I don't know which model you use for that, but you may find that if you tried that was the answer you got on OpenAI, you get a different answer on Claude, and a different answer on Llama. Yeah, I think.
Is there any model that's kind of like a middle ground between those two types of learning?
You get the idea of tool use, and this is a solution I'm a big fan of, where your large language model becomes essentially an interface to other tools. So you don't have to, when you think about Google, to really use Google effectively, historically at least, you've had to phrase questions to it in a specific way, right? You had to kind of understand search, and you understand how to say, go look at the site. And those are things most people didn't do. They stopped typing longer and longer questions, but they never really got the results. So with a large language model, you get a lot of that kind of understanding of context of human language. And then you can start to how to use other tools. So maybe if I need to be very precise in a medical scenario, I'm using a chatbot that is powered by a large language model. But when I ask it to analyze an X-ray, it goes and calls a conventional machine learning algorithm and then gives me the response back.
Fit with each other, or would it be essentially just saying the input from the?
It would be essentially the input, but the way the user wouldn't realize they're separate pieces that are working together. Because you just say, hey, show me the X-ray for Ben Savage that was taken on December 20th. Right? And so it's going to go pull that data, it's going to go analyze it and show you here's what it is and here's what it thinks you should do. That's using conventional machine learning to do most of that. It might be using the large language model to phrase a little bit of the text so it's easier for people to understand.
And maybe it turns out to be an MRI instead of an X-ray.
Yeah, I mean,
Or-
yeah, I mean, you would, because those models would be different, I'd be asking it's, you'd want the professional to be calling specifically what type of test they want the analysis from, so that you know the large language model doesn't freelance. Yeah, this is why, for those of you who don't know, when I use the term expert system, that was the way people would build some of those systems a long time ago. We pre-programmed all the questions and answers. And so that's one of the ways you can put some of those guardrails in. The large language model just makes it easier, so you don't have to do as much hard coding as you did in the past.
That way you're going to prompting, trying to get your large language model to come down to an action like this topic.
That's what some people are doing. I honestly have mixed feelings about some of prompt engineering. I think it's very important to ask the questions, and every model you're going to learn the prompt differently. I think some of it, they probably need to go back to that retrieval augmented generation. I talked about other tools to get better answers. I don't think they can get it as consistently with the prompting. And then if someone changes the way the model works, so I'm thinking about some of the OpenAI cases where, people are watching over time and they say the model is getting dumber as more people are using this, it's continuing to learn. Sometimes you need more control. But yeah, I mean, that's anytime people are doing like serious prompt engineering, they're trying to make the system more repeatable.
Well, do you see those job offerings that are out there to teach AI? Is that legit?
Job offerings is in like, they're
Yeah.
going to teach the person
You're
AI.
gonna teach, they want you to, they're gonna hire you with the purpose of essentially teaching or training their AI.
So I think there's definitely those cases, particularly when you're dealing with a space, you're trying to figure out how to get enough data to go do it and interact with it. That's where you hear the term sometimes reinforcement learning, and you'll see some of the large language models come out and they'll talk about using HRLF. There's a term that people use. It's basically human reinforcement learning, where you're going into the model, you're saying this is a good answer, this is a bad answer, this is and working through that so that helps train the model. So there's definitely some of those. I don't know how long those are going to be there, but it makes sense that there's always going to be a portion of it, right? Because again, think about when we're all little, people have to go and teach us what's the right answer, what's the wrong answer, and come into the world knowing everything. So it's kind of how you have to treat some of the large language models.
Touch on using an off-the-shelf large language model versus a private version of it, maybe for enterprise versus building an LLM, like large enterprise solution.
So if I kind of work backwards, building an LLM is really, really hard. You need a massive data center to go do it, and you need a lot of data to go do it. For most people, I wouldn't advise that. If we all get startup level money that like OpenAI or Anthropic, or get a couple billion in the bank to go build your data center, okay, that's the way to go. If in almost all other cases, if you need something that is going to be very specific to your business, I would start likely with an open source model, provided I can find one with the licensing. And then I would continue to embed additional data and continue to retrain it with my specific corporate data set, or I'd build retrieval augmented generation on top of it, depending on what I'm doing. Now, if I was a smaller business, that's where I would start to look at some of the other OpenAI. For those, I think they would be faster, and I don't have to go build a data set. And with those last two that I talked about, there's going to be always a trade-off of build versus buy, right? To a certain point where if I have to host it because I'm something, I'm a military contractor, I can't have any of my data leaking, so I've got to build it into a data center. Well, that kind of moves me immediately to a lot of the open source models, or a very specific license I would try and work out with someone that would let me take their model, put it in my data center so that it never goes outside. But if I am a normal corporation, I have to look at what is that initial CapEx cost to get started, so capital expense, And then what is my operational cost gonna be? And at what point do those two cross over? That I need to either bring it in-house or find another way to do it. Or have a very angry CFO chasing it because of the monthly cost.
To kind of follow up on that, so for a small business that wasn't interested in, didn't have the expertise to do machine learning or the large language model, but they had a lot of content, like a lot of domain expertise, maybe documentation. Are there models, are there services there like by Amazon or OpenAI where you can upload your content and then use that instead of, you didn't want answers from all chat GPT in the
Yeah.
world, you just want it specific to your business.
Yeah, so for Microsoft and Azure or Microsoft and Amazon for sure, they have the Azure AI, which will let you get licensed. OpenAI or I think they have Llama in there. They may have Claude. I know Amazon is stronger in Claude. They have Mistral and some of the others. And so there you can get basically your own instance of whatever they're providing. You can upload your documents. You can do the either retrieval augmented generation or training. That's where it's separate. You just have to make sure you get the right license because some of them do have a couple of different license models where some you're using the public version, what you want is the private. You pay a little bit of a premium for that, but you get the ability to keep it for your business. Yeah, I appreciate everyone's questions.
Any other questions? No, we can listen to Shannon's presentation in a minute.
Before Ben stops, Ben, can you go to your next slide?
Do this one.
Okay, so Ben is very modest in who he is. He's our CEO of Veritas Automata, but he also runs our artificial intelligence practice. So here's his LinkedIn. Just a tip for LinkedIn, and we'll get into this in my presentation. Send him a note as a connection request if anyone wants to scan that QR code instead of follow, because then you'll not only connect with him and you can have conversations with him, but then compared to just a follow is just you're watching his content. So if you engage with him as a connection, then you'll be
And-
able to talk to him a
and
little bit more.
And specifically mention you saw me here. Unfortunately, as a CEO, I get a lot of people who are doing marketing and trying to sell me things. So
Can you just pull it up?
there we go.
Thank you.
See, remember I said I'm really good at breaking everyone's demos in tech? Perfect example.
And for Shannon's, can we, like the Zoom stuff, can we put that on?
Maybe, we'll see. Let me get switched over and I'll see if I can make it do that.
Okay, well, he's getting me set up, which I so much appreciate. I never have.
Is it showing the full screen on yours or?
Just so I know
Yeah,
who
looks
I'm
good
speaking
here.
to, resonating with
It's
the
just up
audience. Who's like early in your career? Okay, and who's more leadership, wants to find like empowerment within the team? Higher level, okay, cool. All right, so middle of the ground. All right, great. I'm Shannon. Here's the QR code for my LinkedIn. Please connect with me instead of follow. This, like I said, will help me have a little bit more richer of conversations. Mention that you've seen me here. And we'll get started. Do I need a clicky? Are you gonna click for me? Yes. Okay, cool. Okay, so today I'm supposed to be talking about navigating the tech landscape for women. But as we see, there's only 3 women in this room. It's about 10%. My head of operations is here. Her name's Athira. My chief product officer back in the back, Ed Coleman's here. And then also one of my teammates, John Ruling, is also here. So think about that when you're connecting with us after this. Brett said we're gonna have some time for networking. So definitely come and meet us. We're gonna be here the entire week for KubeCon. And then also we have an event tomorrow night down in the Kiln co-working space with the head of product for AWS. So if you're interested, definitely let me know and I'll get you on the list. It is free and you don't have to have a KubeCon ticket. So think about that. So here, kind of like in this room, right? Only 10% are women. 28% of women work within the global tech space. So if you're starting off in your career, think about who you're working with and think about how you can help mold more women to get onto your team, or if someone is looking to get into tech, how to do that. you're a leader, think about the statistics of your team, right? To how that you can have inclusivity and grow a little bit faster within women. So that's only pretty much what I'm going to talk about women, because I really want to focus on the audience of this and how we can get there all together as a successful leadership. So first is our technical expertise. Y'all were asking really great questions to Ben. And that staying curious and that change of evolvement of the market is definitely what you want to focus on, right? As we continue this tech landscape, it's always evolving, and regardless of where you are in your career path, you can get to that leadership. So think about that. Even if you're starting off as project management or a developer and you want to go into operations like Athira has done in the back, you know, you can get there through different paths. So think about this, you know, all these pink little dots and then that box, right? That might be your goal, but then you can get there regardless of your journey. It's mainly like how curious you are, how much you're learning, how much you are growing as a human. So obviously, project manager, product management, executive leadership, regardless of your goals, you can get there. You just have to really find your path and stay curious. So on the next slide, we'll talk about how to get there. And by the way, this conversation is probably only going to be about 20 minutes long. I usually keep a pretty good open space for questions, because in the next couple of slides, stay here for me, Ben. We'll get into tactical execution on how to like build your personal brand. So while we're getting there, think about these leadership skills. So if you're at the beginning of your career, or even if you are a leader, how can you motivate your team to get to where you are? And that is through communication. Communication is really a hard subject for us as technologists, right? We have this tunnel vision and we don't have this confidence within ourselves, but think about how you can talk more and just over communicate. We always say in our teams that more over communication is better than none, right? We never want to have a customer that is thinking like, oh, what are the next steps? Why haven't I heard from my person or my product? So think about that as well. Trend analysis, we're going to get this into the next slide, but as someone who is trying to get to leadership, understanding the market and understanding the trends is key within our leadership conversations. Not only from a technical perspective, but also what are the trends in general within the market, so we can have those conversations. Also, if you're thinking to yourself, like, I've never even thought about a trend, that's something that you can have that conversation with your leadership, because I promise you that they'll want to talk to you about trends. It's like the hot topic of our leadership meetings typically. Decision making, right? Being decisive and confident within your decision, that will also help you get to your leadership as well, because being in front of a team or making those decisions is not always easy, right? As we know, if leaders are not. So think about your decision making and if it's like headed towards the correct path for your team. Strategic thinking, that goes back to your trend analysis. Emotional intelligence, this is a hot topic usually within questions, but are you leading the team correctly? Are you thinking about putting yourself into that person's shoes? Are you making quick decisions and supporting your team, mentoring your team? Something to think about as well. And then adaptability and embracing change. That's actually one of our culture points of our company, but embracing change in general, right? As technologists, everything is always evolving. So that also goes back to understanding the trends, understanding your strategic thinking. So as we evolve, as we go on to the next slide, I think that's about technologies. But this is something to think about for the trending technologies. All the technologies on the right-hand side are what we specialize or we use at Veritas Automata. So it's a lot, right? Like we have a team that we actually have 5 Kubernauts. If you're familiar with the term on our team, we have highly skilled Microsoft people as well. So we really try to use all these technologies to create a perfect solution for our customers, regardless of their complex problems. And like we just heard from Ben, artificial intelligence is a buzzword right now. Everyone's all about it. What's going on with it? Machine learning. Those two are probably the things that we talk about most right now in the market, right? Understanding where the market's headed. But it's understanding truly the questions that were asked are excellent, because it's understanding truly what the solution is from these 2 offerings that will help you become leaders in this space of technology. Blockchain, if anyone's familiar with Hyperledger Fabric, compared to cryptocurrency, right? We have our chief product officer in the back, he can definitely speak about that. Internet of Things and Kubernetes, some of these might be like, okay, yeah, this is obvious, right? We've heard these terms before. But as we are trying to become leaders, or as we are doing a trend analysis, this is what we are seeing right now currently in the market. In 2025, obviously, it's going to evolve as well. So now we're gonna go into a little bit of a personal development conversation of cycle for growth. And this is something that I'm gonna sit here and hopefully everyone is watching this, because this is the key of advancement. Regardless if you're at the beginning of your career or you're trying to lead your team, please think about this to help them promote their brands or to promote your own personal brand. So we're gonna start with the Kubernetes certification. I asked a couple of people if anyone is certified here. Usually it's crickets. There's not a lot of certification programs that are completed within the tech space. It's usually a professional development leader that, you know, is highly trying to motivate their team to be continuous learning, but also to complete their certification. So here, we get the certification. And then from here, we go into a what we call as marketers, social amplification. So not only, yes.
What is Kubernetes?
Kubernetes. Okay, so Ed, you want to answer that? What's Kubernetes?
It's a technology, it's an open source technology. And you've seen it to take workloads and containerize them. The whole set of tools, management. So it's about running the software in a new way. Called Kubernetes. I've been around for a while. It's got some cool tool sets. What you might be seeing other than that is things like VMware and other things that are virtualized. So
And what do you mean by containerized?
I mean, a simple way to understand would be that it's a structure where you can scale up what's in the container to put the new across virtualized hardware. So you're actually creating inside of a Kubernetes cluster sets of worker nodes and master nodes that basically take the applications and run them. And then scale them up, scale them down, so they can increase automatically do that too, or the need to. It's managing big workloads and doing it in a way that's really
There's 5 certifications for Kubernetes, and when you complete those 5, you're called a Kubestronaut. It's like the highest level, and I don't have the Kubestronaut example in the next couple of slides, but it's a rigorous certification program. So if you want to specialize in Kubernetes, that's the cloud native like technology. That's what KubeCon is entirely, that huge tech show. It's cloud-based,
I think
cloud native based.
you'll find that we're big fans of it because it lends itself to programmatic infrastructure. So that you can write things, and so that if you need to go do a deploy or need to do a scaling event, it's very easy just to have that as a single line of code that's testable, well, not single line, but it's something that is testable and easily repeatable. So we tend to think about things, it's like, okay, if someone says you're gonna go double your capacity in 2 hours, how do you do that without causing a meltdown between the rest of the team?
So you get certified, and then we go into this talking about ourselves, right? As technologists, we don't really like to do that. In general, we're very shy, and we have that funnel vision and keep our heads down, right? So it's talking about ourselves, which evolve into the cycle of growth for yourself, right? Having that confidence to talk about yourself. Then you start growing your network, right? Look at this community here. We have about 40-ish people. They might not know about all your beautiful talents, right? So think about how you can start talking about yourself And trust me, it's not easy, right? It's like being that authentic self, promoting yourself. It's called a personal brand. And then from here, of course, you grow your network, but then you get a supportive system, right? Here, obviously, right? We're all together. I'm sure if anyone that has connected with each other, you're all supportive of yourselves, but not only is it a supportive system underneath this computer, then you can start solving those complex challenges because you've done the continuous learning and you're staying curious and you're evolving from the change. So then from here, we're gonna jump to what is a personal brand? Has anyone heard this term before? A personal brand? Okay, cool. All right, so in marketing, we talk about a personal brand as just who you are in pretty much public, who you identify as, what do you want the world to see? But this also is very, very particular within your career growth. So as we're seeing these next generations of people, right, the people that we're mentoring or even coming into the technology world, they're talking a lot about themselves on social media. By no means am I saying that everyone needs to become an influencer. It's more being comfortable and confident within yourself to be able to talk about yourself. From there, you differentiate yourself, right? And then also it builds trust and reliability within your community. But the main takeaway within your personal brand is for you to be authentic and who you want people to see. So from there, we get into why is it important and how to do that. And first is defining who you want for people to see. Me particularly, I ran past it in my first slide, but I like to grow things by plants or Lego sets or even teams. Mentoring people, I run the certification program at Veritas Automata, so that's my personal brand. You have to decide what you want people to know about you, so then that will help you within your conversations and your career advancement. Next one is your online presence, right? I just talked about being an influencer, but also it's what you want the public to see. Not only is this for professional development, it also helps you with your soft skills in your personal life as well. And then thirdly is your professional image. This is something that a lot of us technologists we work on continuously, right? Because we're behind the screens, we're in code, and we don't really have an image. Usually we're a number. So think about how you can differentiate yourself if you're actually looking for a promotion, if you want to talk to your leadership. This all bubbles back to becoming a leader, right? All these steps will help you get there regardless of where you are in your career. But also, if you have a team that is numbers, right? And you're trying to show the value to your upper management, your CEO, your CFO, right? You can mentor them into becoming their personal brand within the company to provide extended value. Okay, so now I'm going to get into actual examples of my two team members. David Ayala, he's located in Colombia. Actually, Wilson's in Colombia as well. David is Kubernetes DevOps automation engineer. Wilson is more on our tech talent and also helps with our sales and marketing. So these two examples of the LinkedIn profiles is where we want to be for showcasing our personal brand. And then I'll get into the business side of it as well. So the next slide, we are going to focus on David Ayala. What he first did was get certified. Now, I keep using Kubernetes as a certification, but think about even Microsoft or Python or any type of your specific programming language. There's certifications out there all over. This takeaway is if you get certified. So David goes ahead and gets certified, spends time on it, he becomes a CKA. He posts a social post about it, talks to his network, has the hashtags, best practices of his social post. Then we get into what he does on his profile. He puts it in his headline. So if someone is searching for a person in their community or they're trying to do outreach and they need someone that's apples to apples, he has it instantly in his profile. Then these two features are actually at the very bottom of the profile. So he updates his skills, then he updates his licenses as well. Now, these two are actually for pure searchability and the algorithm update within LinkedIn. So if you are looking for a new job or starting off in your career, these are highly valuable for the recruitment effort. So there's 5 parts of LinkedIn. One part of LinkedIn is the recruitment feature. If you have these skills and licenses updated, they will be able to search for you based off of these 2 points on your profile. So keep that in mind. Then he goes one more step further, and you're doing great.
Yeah.
So then he goes one step further and he features the social post on his profile. So then from a scroll and searchability perspective, he can go, they can see it right at the top of this. So this is very tactical, and it's based off of a certification. But think about this more broadly of thought leadership article posts or attending Kubernetes, week at KubeCon or something like that. If you do all these tactical implementations on your LinkedIn, this will help with your personal brand. Hopefully that resonates back. So definitely ask me questions about this because this truly does help for you personally. Now let's talk about it from a business perspective. So you have a product, you're offering this to customers. They want to see the clout of the company. And maybe the marketing team doesn't want to talk too much about these specific engineers. From a leadership perspective, if they have their LinkedIn profile up to date, up to speed, 100% A+ with all the things that will help with the algorithm, right? This will also help with the company's clout of thought leadership and expertise within your specific technology or even offering or product, something like that. So hopefully this really resonates with y'all because this absolutely helps with personally and professionally. Okay, and so this is how we get there as well. So we talked about what a personal brand is, the cycle of growth, what to do on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn, that was one example of LinkedIn, but think about other platforms as well. Reddit, GitHub, TikTok is huge right now, Instagram as well for videos. So of course we focused on LinkedIn from a professional perspective, but if you want to become a thought leader, or if you want to just showcase your personal brand a little bit more, think about a full digital positioning for that social amplification of yourself. Additionally, right, we talked about building a diverse network or a club or community, right? So you're always going to meet strangers, but having that confidence, having that curiosity of meeting new people will definitely help within your growth. Here we are this week, right? Attending conferences, workshops, and meetups. This goes hand in hand into contributing open source projects and collaborations. You will be very surprised if you haven't contributed to a project, how many people you are able to meet that will help with your career growth and even in your confidence of your expertise.
And I just want to add one thing here, particularly if you are transitioning careers and new into development and you're looking for some way to build some portfolio, like doing your own projects, but contributing to open source. Those are things that if you show those to a group who's hiring, they help them understand what your capabilities are more than just your certificate. That helps you stand apart from someone who's just coming graduate where they don't have that same portfolio or that open source contribution.
Leveraging social media and professional platforms, we got into that, and then mentorship and continuous learning. So I talked a lot about personal brands and how to enhance yourself, but also it's giving back to the community. This question, hopefully y'all can see it. If you could give one piece of advice to someone just starting in tech, what would that be? Think about, if you're super high leadership, think about 20 years ago, for me particularly, who I was when I first started out and who I am now. Or if you're starting out, who can you start collaborating with and communicating with that you can, give some advice as well. So this is the network is your network. I truly believe in that. It can be a little bit of a controversial statement, but think about that as you want to grow as a professional, as you want to grow as a leader, or even a mentor. The more people you know, the better. And so that resonates and goes back to the LinkedIn profile of showcasing yourself as well. And yeah, so here's my LinkedIn. Please connect with me, like I said. And I definitely want to hear some thoughts. And I usually get a lot of questions, particularly on very small details that I ran over. So I want to definitely provide the space for questions from you.
I'll give a big question. So, your presentation, I think, was excellent for us individually, but you two are representing your company. Aren't you essentially making people more valuable to other people who might try to approach your staff?
Yeah, we get that question a lot.
So, but I think if you don't help your team grow.
Yeah.
You can't help your business grow, and you can't be so afraid. What is the one meme that, someone asked, what if we train our employees and they leave? What if we don't train them and they stay? Right, that's what you gotta think about. You want your team to be the most capable, and hopefully that will grow the whole business. But you gotta be, at least I take the perspective, you gotta be aware of people's career path. And you want them to continue to have those other opportunities. If they're not within your business, maybe they get lucky and they go to another business and they bring you back in. This is, for me as a consultant, when I was a consultant, that was always one of the key things. Like we never complained when one of our customers hired one of our people, because likely they would re-engage us because they knew us and they built that. So I guess from my perspective, yes, it's a risk, but you have to trust your teams and you have to hope that you can create the business in a way that will be good for them as well as you go.
And if you create that space of mentorship and true leadership, they're not gonna wanna leave you as a leader. And just a disclaimer, Ben and I are so fortunate to present together. Usually, I think this is our second event that we presented together, DevOps Day Medellin, but typically we're not together. So truly we're here and we do these events for the community and for the community growth. That's a huge part of our culture. So yeah, absolutely. Your takeaway is right? Growing yourself. And like Ben said, it could be a risk, but if you are a true leader, if you provide that space, if you provide that mentorship, there's a lot of loyalty in that, especially within the upcoming generations.
I think, I don't know if you've read the book, Brad Felton, the guy who's one of the founding architects firms. He has a book on creating tech ecosystems and communities. And one of the key things there that he says is to give freely of your time, as long as people aren't abusing it. And so whether it's training or giving presentation like this, with the thought that if you do those enough, there will be real business opportunity that come from it. But you can't do everything as purely transactional or what will you do for me? Because if you do that, everything, and I've encountered startup incubators where we were looking at buying tech or working on tech, and it was so encumbered. There were so many people with rights, so many things like that. It's like, we love this, we want to work with it, but we can't make it work. There was one case I was doing a project where I needed to find a polymer sensor. So it's using injection molded plastic to do what you would normally use a rod cell for. We can go into the details of that if you guys want to talk to me after this. But the core problem was, it had come out of some research a guy did during his master's thesis at Clemson. He had spun it off into a business. That business has had a problem, and they'd sold the rights to someone else. So by the end of it, we looked at it and went, well, this guy says he owns it. These guys say they own it. And Clemson says they got a piece of it. And eventually we said, this would be perfect for us, but we can't do it. So that's kind of how I think about the transaction. You can ruin a business by being overly transactional. You can risk it by giving it away, but I think you do less damage.
Train your people well enough that they can leave, or treat them good enough that they want to stay. Hold back on that, and remember how to invest in it, that's very well.
The majority of the team has been with us for at least 4 years. I think that's the majority is at least 4, and then we've got at least 30% that have been working for 8 years plus.
And actually for the company, if somebody left, you know, something new came back for us. That was not the situation. And that in particular came back to the DevOps. Came back with a lot of rough skills and things that he was developing with us, but you couldn't really solve that passion. Actually, the going back to the So Shannon, I have a question. So, you know, the economy's slow. I'm old enough that I've gone through these cycles before, but I run a lot of these meetups, meet a lot of young people or people, you know, transitioning. especially for people coming out of college or just getting, what's your recommendation for those going into the field that maybe don't have an idea of what they could really build themselves?
Yeah.
And kind of need it, and there's that problem where people are looking for people with experience, but you don't have any experience. So what are some ways for people new?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I feel Ben, myself, and Ed are all gonna have three separate answers, so I definitely want to open the space for their answers, but for me particularly, I think it's if you can't find a job, truly understand what programming language or skill set is going to make you happy, but then to that one slide of staying curious and becoming certified in multiple things, and then you can contribute that open mindset to the company. So we have our team, you know, we have our Kubernetes specialists, our blockchain specialists, our AI, we have a great Microsoft program as well. But now, as they enter through those specific skill sets, we are expanding their knowledge into the other programming languages or the skill sets as well. So stay curious, and don't get defeated, right? As you said, it goes in ebbs and flows, especially within our industry and all industries, particularly in the market at the moment. So try to invest in yourself, and become certified and just stay positive. But then also the networking aspect, right? So you got your skill sets and your programming languages, but then make those conversations, become confident to go to these community events and ask questions, and think about the higher level questions of what are the challenges of the company that person's working at? Who are the leadership people that I can start connecting with so I can have those conversations as well? So it is truly different points of your path that you need to expand upon, so then you can land that job. And once you get there, if you have that mindset of staying curious and asking those questions, that will also help you expand within your position as well. What do you think, Ben?
Well, I think right now, it's hard to say the economy's slow, but I'm gonna say it's really weird. And there's a lot of indecisiveness, right? Because we're going through an election cycle. Which makes them, but what that means is a lot of people put off decisions until they know where things are gonna go. And with the way this election cycle went, you're probably gonna see that longer than normal. Normally you see it start to pick up once the election is over. But now I think until you see the presidential transition in January and some of those initial executive rulings and things, that's gonna change the way things go. But so what that would mean is a lot of businesses are gonna be putting off decisions, but it doesn't mean that businesses don't have needs. They have turnover, they have people who have to leave because they get sick or because other things happen, or people go to other businesses. And I think to be open both geographically and the type of business you look at is important. I think the other thing is to, what's the right way to say it? To make sure your resume does not look like it was written by ChatGPT. It's very easy. And the first tip I will give you is if your resume looks like it has someone was given a thesaurus and they didn't need it, that's serious. That's one of the first giveaways for a lot of ChatGPT based writing. But as someone who hires a lot of people, because I'm involved with a number of different businesses, one of the challenges is sorting out, is a resume real or not? Is the person real? Because you see so many people apply and what harms all job seekers is it's become so easy to automatically apply to lots and lots of jobs. You see people who have no idea. I've seen bartenders apply for roles that require a PhD data science. People are just spamming resumes. And so I think you've got to be aware of that and think of ways to make contact, to Shannon's point, with the business so that people know you're real, know you're interested. Probably more than just a cover letter to be able to cut through that. And I think if you can find people at networking events who are at the businesses that you're interested in working for, I think that's going to be super important to continue to come through. So unfortunately, I don't have a magic answer on how it's going to get better because it's bad for the job seekers because people are using more AI tools to filter applicants out because they're getting more AI generated applications. And that's like the ultimate AI catch-22 where two AIs are arguing with each other. But it's unfortunately where tech is at the moment. So I think that's key. I think identifying those more niche technologies, right? We kind of talked a little bit about sysadmin, or you asked a great question about what is Kubernetes in particular. And getting to where you understand some of those deeper layers and not just the base tool itself, but how does it operate, whether it's fundamentals. Good SaaS sysadmins are still really hard to find. Because DevOps people know one piece, but they don't necessarily know really how an operating system works sometimes. And that can be where the weirdness is, or where you can put this super enhancement to make something run a little bit faster. And so those are all things you can use to stand out. And no, it's not typical programming, but the reality is a lot of programmers I met who really don't know how a computer and operating system works. They don't know why things go wrong when they do, and they can't debug it because they know Java, but they don't know everything that runs through it. So being able to help people understand that, and that gets to social media and other things, to be able to convey that knowledge that you have. Because unfortunately, we are in a place where whether we want to be or not, we're all going to be our own influencer of that.
Something else I think through a different lens, I run sales for Veritas Automata, and as technical people, finding technical people with really strong client communication skills is something that's really challenging. And in the job market where that's something where there is a big gap of people, and there will always be, no matter pick the technology, whatever it is, people who are able to communicate, whether it's implementation or even just sales as a whole, people who can communicate well with clients and lead technological teams are always going to have a place in an organization. They're always the highest paid technical people there, are always the most valuable technical people there. So capitalizing the channel segment, building your brand, knowing how to communicate really strongly. I mean, I think that's a really differentiates yourself in the market.
Well, and that's a great point, John, right? Because most of the time as developers, you think, I want to go program. But there are these other roles like solution engineering roles where you're paired with a salesperson. So you are not a salesperson. You are a technical person helping with the selling process, but you're looking at a customer's environment. You're saying, here's how you're going to apply this technology to really make it work. So it's a mix between consulting, but a lot of times you have to be really, really technical to understand that particular solution and maybe even able to do some config and some basic development. So if you're a new developer and you haven't done a lot yet, that could be a different path. Or if you want to transition because you're tired of going, why would this damn thing compile? Or if you're using Python, why is this making you white spaces in the building guys? So.
I'm curious, I've got a bunch of my students because I teach here at MTech. And so if anybody's hiring them, they're the rock stars that are actually going to do things like this. But I really appreciate everything you've been saying about promoting yourself and being one way. I'm curious from the perspective of doing freelance stuff. What's your thoughts on freelance versus trying hard to get out and get a corporate job?
So I think that one, it depends on what do you want to do as an individual, right? Because there's one challenge, it's the unspoken dirty secret of freelancing. It's how do you make sure you do it? Right, that you do the work, and tools like Fiverr, others have made it easier, but that's going to be a very real thing. Being part of a business doesn't always guarantee you're going to get paid, but generally makes it easier because you've got more structure helping to make sure the business gets paid, which is what drives your check. So I'm all for freelancers, and I think it's going to depend on the tech in the particular area you are in. And then you're going to have to get good at marketing and finding, you've got to learn the sales aspect of it, which can be, that's what I find for a lot of people who say they want to freelance is probably the most uncomfortable, is where do you get those jobs? And where do you get the ones that are going to pay what you want for the kind of projects that are interesting to you?
Yeah,
So-
and that's a huge part of freelancing is marketing yourself. So if you want to go into freelancing or even contracting, it's a little bit different. But think about that, right? This is the whole presentation for you if you want to go into freelancing, because to Ben's point, you have to market and sell yourself against, a whole Fiverr list. So we're huge proponents of that.
But I'll also say some of that is dependent on your geo where you are, right? So like in Ohio, where I'm based and where I've done most of my direct hiring until we put the team in Miami and went more national, there's not a lot of freelancing in Ohio, right? That's not the ecosystem with the companies that are there. So we've got a lot of big companies like Kroger and P&G, and they don't bring in freelance developers in the same way. There's not that startup ecosystem or that environment. Whereas Salt Lake City has some more of that private equity type mindset and some of the things that are a little closer to Silicon Valley than you would find in Ohio. But what that means is there are a lot more businesses that are going to want freelancers because they're trying to manage their cash flow and get that initial startup. And then they may pause while they're waiting for the business to get traction so that I can get. So you have to be aware of what the ecosystem where you're trying to get either the freelancing sold at higher rates, or how do you tap into the one that's gonna be freelancing?
So for y'all that are looking for a job and thinking about freelancing, what Ben is saying is essentially you're gonna have to study the market of your surrounding areas to make sure it's either one or the other. So I come from Philly, he's in Ohio, right? Philly's huge for contractors and freelancers because it's just the way of life there. So that's what the study of the market will really help you if you're trying to decide on full-time versus contractor or. You had a question in that hat.
Oh, me? I was just gonna continue the conversation that we brought up with the question that was asked if you look how to start. I think personal projects was
Yeah.
I talked about stuff that was just I was curious, you know.
Yeah.
So it's if you get a flex server for $200 and you just go crazy on it.
Yeah.
You know, you install containers and you develop Linux skills, you develop Docker skills, you develop all these skills. So even talking about that during an interview.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great point. We have a R&D practice, and a lot of our cool ideas is based off of those innovative, and he used to lead an innovations team. So a lot of those cool ideas are something that we offer now that's based off of those personal projects. So keep that in mind as well, staying curious and testing it. And failure is just one time, keep moving past all that and continue with that, because if you can have that in an interview that you said, yeah, I had this project, it failed, but I kept on going, or it was super successful, that is what technologists and leaders want to hear within this world because of our ever evolving market, right? And not all, the change is the only constant thing in our world at the moment.
And personal,
Thank you guys. Stay first.
and personal projects, you may need to figure out how to bring them up in an interview, because not all managers or leaders are good about asking about those. But I've definitely hired people when I knew what their other side projects were. Maybe their main career type stuff wasn't exactly what I needed for the team, but I knew what they were doing on the side. Like I knew they were working with Arduino or something like that. And I knew they were gonna have to work with connected devices. So it's like, yeah, you were a JavaScript or Java developer for 20 years on big enterprise mainframe applications. You come to me for an IT role, I'm looking at it, your skills aren't gonna translate. But then if I'm like, oh, you've got a Raspberry Pi, you've got a home automation system, you were building sensor modules to go talk to, it's like, now my conversation with you is gonna be different. Because that helps me understand what the skills are that you can apply.
Yeah, so I'm switching from working in the therapy field, or I like the way you said recovering from working in the therapy field. And I found it interesting with the ratios. It's a lot more even, or sometimes I was even in the minority. From your perspective, why do you feel like there is that gap in tech? And kind of going back to what you were saying earlier about supporting women in tech, what are some ways to potentially overcome some of those blocks?
So again, I might be a dinosaur, but I started in 2004, and I've always been digital. So women in STEM. Now I'm obviously majorly in tech. So I think it was from my generation, it was more what we were coached on as we were like being evolved as children. Now it is a part of life. Actually, my entire team all come from, even though they're marketers, they all come from a tech background because of video games, gamification. So now it's a part of life. So we're seeing a much bigger increase in drive within women for tech because it's accepted. So I think it's generationally based. I don't necessarily think, to me, it's not a negative thing that there is a lower number of women, because the women that are in this tech field are assertive. We have bold personalities and we can be a part of the conversation. So I'm all for it. I'm all for the women empowerment. But to your point of you asking how you can bring women into this field, you are the leader that we need as women to give us space within here to have our voice and to be a part of the conversation. I think there's a lot of gender positioning within conversation, even professionally and personally. So as leaders or as the next generation of leaders have asked their opinion, right? If it's half and half, or even one woman ask for opinion and see, not necessarily show favoritism, but just try and get all of the opinions within your entire team. And that will also boost confidence within them.
I'll start with some other fundamental things, right? So one is a lot of the way you write job descriptions can impact that, right? There's been a lot of studies where if you say must have at least 10 plus years of experience, and a woman only has 9, they tend to not apply. So you're going to think about how do you phrase job descriptions to really be as, what do you need, and to be open. And there's some other phrasing I don't know off the top of my head. So you have to, but the way you write the job description is one of the things. The other thing you've got to think about, this is why I've been a big believer in remote or hybrid work. Because I was a consultant, that's what we did. I was doing that in 2000. And so everybody acts like it's a new thing now. It's been going on for a long time. If you're in consulting or sales, you may never go to the office because you're always on the road or you're in different projects. But one of the things that being either hybrid or flexible with the allowing people to work from home, if you're not full remote, is that allows people who may not be able to come into an office, whether it's because they've got some kind of condition where they can't be in the office, or there's some kind of caregiver. We normally think of caregivers as women, but now more and more people are caring for older parents. So if someone can work from home, they have the opportunity to go take them to appointments or deal with that. But the corresponding thing is you have to build the mechanisms in the business that trust, so that people are delivering on what their deliverables are. Not the reality is, it's the dirty secret that as a manager, I don't care if you work 40 hours as long as you get all your tasks done. And if it takes you 20 hours that week, or if it takes you 50, those are the tasks you signed up for. I expect you to do it. It also means that as a manager, you have to think about, or a leader, you have to think about, how do I do this differently? So maybe I'm not expecting it to be done from 8 to 5. Maybe they're going to do it from 6 to 10 when someone's asleep, the kids are asleep, and then they're going to come back and do another session later in the night, right? That can all be acceptable if you design your business that way. Those are ways to be more inclusive for women, but for many other groups that you want to bring in. And so you got to start to think about that. You got to think about what are the other cultural values you want into the business. Because there are a lot of things, it's kind of what Shannon was talking about discussions and decision making, right? You got to find ways to go engage everyone. And particularly if you have a multinational business. Here in the US, we're very American-centric the way we think about things. And we don't think about what that means from a cultural perspective. But there are a lot of things that you need to think about. If you don't hear someone voicing something, you need to draw that out of them. And this could be an international individual who's not as comfortable with English, or from a different culture where confrontation may not be strong, maybe it's comfortable, or for women where they've got some of those same things that we've culturally trained in. So you've got to build some of that awareness. Because the reality is we all have some of this programming that's just cultural, right? We grow up with it, it's around us. So you have to be aware of it. And those are things that you can provide training on and help people with. And there's no one thing you can do to make it better. So you got to focus on doing lots of different things, and then creating those opportunities and being willing to take risks to go do that for people. Yeah, someone may be very, very capable for it, but they've got 4.5 years versus 5. Okay, so it's right on the line. So let's take the opportunity. Or if they're transitioning and they've got other experience, I think about, this is not an example of a women in tech. This is someone actually came not from therapy, but similar. They come from managing Section 8 housing. And someone we brought did not have a formal tech background. But he had it as a hobby back to you. What are your home projects, right? What are your side projects? And he's turned out to be a killer DevOps manager. We got to put some coaching and some training in for him. But he's got all the people skills because of that other background that I would never find. He's literally dealt with crazy people. To go deal with a bunch of engineers, which we are crazy people. And that's a skill set. You got to be open-minded about it. But not every business will.
So there's a question for those of us who are wanting to transition eventually for IC roles, the management or sales. So I myself am a DevOps engineer. I'm early career. I spend almost all my time coding and revenue. And at the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned the importance of communication and emotional intelligence. And from my experience so far in the industry, at least my role, like as an engineer, I don't have a ton of opportunities to grow in those two areas of emotional intelligence and communication skills. One of the things I can do outside work to build those skills, so I don't have to build them from scratch by the time I'm done.
So, and first and foremost, in the tech world, and I know John just touched on this, we are always looking for original tech to come over to marketing and sales. If that's the path you want to take, you will be a unicorn, because that helps John and I in conversations and helping solve those challenges for our customers from a technical perspective. So keep that in mind. If anyone wants to go into sales and marketing, that our teams will welcome you with open arms. But to get there is to be able to communicate. So Ed and John actually both hit on this, but taking that, I wrote this code to turn this alert green and that did this, right? But what does those tactical implementations do for the bigger product or do for your customers as a business goal, right? That's a huge jump. But understanding the full strategy of what you're providing and how that can change and make things better in conversation, right? In communication, not in just your brain, like, oh yeah, I got all that. But that's how that strategical mindset, that communication, that emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence also, just for the crowd, is not an easy thing to master, right? We're human. So taking the personalization out of the conversation to become a conversation is not an easy thing to do because we are human. So that will come with your leadership as you evolve, even as a technologist. So I would just, and how do you develop those skills? I think that's where you have your community, right? You get a career coach or a career mentor, or even your network, and like start just, birds of a feather truly flock together, especially within our space. So if you find someone that you resonate with, ask them a lot of questions, be curious and continue that conversation, because leaders will, if they're true leaders, will always want to help. So have those conversations, and right, you and I are connected on LinkedIn. So if you have questions, I'm always available to answer those, or John or Ed or even Ben, right? That's why we provide our LinkedIn QR code so we can continue these conversations. So keep that in mind just for everyone. If you want to go over to sales and marketing and you can develop those skills of actually communicating, major unicorn within your journey or your career path. Even also, sorry, one second. Even if you become CEO, CPO, CIO, you still have to have that delivery and communication. So it's not just for marketing and sales, it's also just a leadership skill in general.
But I think as someone earlier in their career, you're not gonna like what I'm gonna say, but take opportunity to write documentation. The more you can write, that will help people understand your ability to communicate. And the reality is, we're gonna talk a lot about presentations and speaking, but the written communication is almost more important always, particularly as we do more remote and distributed teams. Someone has to write that documentation. Someone has to write the presentations, not everyone understand what is the desired intent. So if you can find opportunities to do those, that gives you an opportunity to start letting people within the business see, okay, here's how he's thinking, here's how his strategic mindset is. And other leaders, team leaders, and eventually people above that will start to notice, okay, here's someone who spends the time to do that. Because there's nothing wrong with just running the right code, but you need to communicate with the rest of the business folks too, whether it's QA, other teams in your business, or to the management of the business, right? So taking the time to do that written work, which is not always fun, even if you get comfortable writing, it will never be as easy as you think, and you'll be 5 hours into what you thought was going to be a one-page document because you've got edited and tweaked and stuff. But the more you practice that, and that will lead to your ability to speak and go interact, because as you know the knowledge, I find I tend to write like I speak. So that helps build that voice. And then particularly as you have opportunity to present, to share that with other people. That's the biggest difference I've learned between engineering school and business school. Dirty secret, I did not go to school to be an engineer. I went to school for my first year to be an engineer. I found calculus. Calculus and I did not get along. After the third round, it won. So I went to the business school. But in the engineering school, people were given tools and said, go apply these to solve a problem. In the business school, they made us do presentation after presentation after presentation after presentation. So some of the education there was more rote memorization, which I didn't think was as good compared to, hey, here's a tool, go apply it to this problem and give me an answer, which is what most of the engineering projects always. But from the business, you got much more used to speaking with people over time and being able to do that written communication. That's the one thing I think most engineering schools lack. So if you get that opportunity, the more chances you find to work on your writing, that will lead you to be more comfortable with your presentations and sharing that information you learned. And because you're the one who wrote it, it'll be easier for you to talk about it because you've already internalized that.
And right now you're at a startup, so you're probably wearing many hats. Once you deliver and your direct supervisor can trust that you will deliver, then you can start having those conversations of like, hey, can I shadow sales, or hey, can I shadow marketing? And it's truly that if you are delivering for your leader and they trust you, those conversations will be extremely easy to have, because if they are a great leader, which I'm sure they are, especially within the startup world, they'll be able to guide that path for you as well.
I wanted to throw out two quick cents on the documentation concept and something that you mentioned earlier. You also put yourself in someone else's shoes when you're writing documentation. And as engineers, that's a very difficult thing to do. And that ties into the EQ side that Shannon was talking about. And then also earlier in the presentation, we were talking about where can you contribute to that experience with open source. So many open source projects need documentation. And guess what? GitHub, GitLab, they don't know the difference between contributing code and contributing documentation. It's all pushes and pull requests.
And any developer who tells you the comments are all you need to understand the code, and the code explains itself. I think that's the next best thing to the used car where it was only driven on Sundays by a little bit.
I'm smiling at that because this was literally our conversation driving here this evening of what we're doing right now for a particular client. So documentation is key for sure.
Yeah, just to add to that, like meetups, I think are great, and before the pandemic, I think they would be a little better because we had a lot here in the valley, and they're coming back. But it's a great opportunity to present among your peers, things you're working on, and even if you're not necessarily an expert in it, it forces you to kind of learn some things, present some ideas, and then I always appreciate the feedback I get from my peers saying, hey, you tried using this tool, or we tried doing this, and that's kind of part of that networking and getting yourself out there, and yeah, there's a lot of those soft skills of communication, which I find more in my career. It's about working with people, which developers often don't, but often it's communicating with others and meeting along with people that really is what kind of keeps you, moving up in the industry and being a better influence in the tech area.
Perfect example of that is I've got a guy I've worked with since 2017, 2018. I met him because I had gotten convinced to sponsor a hackathon for this parent AR drones, if you remember those, in like 2016, 2017. I think there were like 10 teams. He was not a member, but the woman who was the co-sponsor of it, I was trying to recruit her, but she had just moved to a new role. And so she wasn't available because she'd been there for like a month. So she said, hey, I can't do this, but you should go talk to this guy. And I worked with him now since, like I said, since like 2017, 2018. So that was someone who threw a meetup. I met someone who referred me to someone else because they weren't the right one. And so all that kind of stuff, the presentation and all that, yeah, it helps.
As someone who's made the jump from engineering to sales, I can tell you a couple things that help me. Number one, get uncomfortable with being, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. You want to do things that you're not comfortable with naturally, get in front of as many people as possible. Two, know your audience. Most of the decision makers we're dealing with, we have gray beards, we have gray in our hair. Don't respond to texts like a lot of millennials or Gen Zers like to do. They pick up the phone. So you want to be able to pick up the phone with their safety and being able to properly formulate an email or something Whereas verbally, you're on the spot. Don't be afraid. Get on those calls. Because in the end, we're solving problems. You're solving the problem. You're solving the customer's problem. Keep it simple. And as long as you kind of stick to those principles, you're gonna be fine. You just have, like I said, number one, get comfortable being uncomfortable. I'll public speak as many times as I possibly can. Just to get out there and continue to do it.
And it doesn't mean it's easy. It
Yeah.
just means that you've done it more, so you know how to go manage through it.
Embrace, like, I love it when people challenge me, especially in the stage. I love it because it's done the engineering part of it back out. Great change.
And the communication component, that's something that you want to do, communicate that. To people. Especially reach out to people who are in sales. Tell them that's something that you're interested in, especially with the extreme technical prowess that you get. It's so hard, in a lot of high engagements, you get a bunch of technical people on the phone and get on a call, usually they're pulling teeth to get stuff out of them, they kind of fumble around because they just don't have the level of communication skills that somebody in sales does. The people in sales don't have the technical skills to answer the questions that are necessary to deal with the customer. So I mean, you can find a way to bridge that gap. People are looking always in an organization for who are my technical guys who I know I can bring on to talk to something. Who's a guy I know I can get on a call and they're going to help me close this deal. They're the people who really close the deal. Salespeople tee up the meetings, they formulate the plan, they put it together, but the time the deal is always won is when you've got one of those technical people who really knows how to communicate well. And you see them win them over, and that's what wins the deal. Not what the salesperson does with writing the email right. It's getting those people together and getting them communicating with the customer, and that's when we're going to happen. And so a good leader will definitely want to embrace that and welcome that, and possibly get you sales training, help you in whatever way they can. Because that's something every organization does.
Well, I think to that point, it's really important not just to talk with your manager, but other managers and leaders within the business. There was the question earlier about, well, yeah, it's a lot of risk to go train employees or help employees grow. And one case I've got a young woman who's been working in a different part of the business. You don't know her, Shannon. Who's been working there for 2 to 3 years, fairly new graduate, just got married. So as a manager, those are all signs to me, and she's working on her MBA. Those are all signs at some point she's going to hit a life event and maybe decide to no longer be in business. None of that is bad. It's just, hey, she got married. If someone has, if the family has a new child, those are all points where they decide maybe they're going to change. They might prioritize different things. So combine that with her MBA. She's got a fairly new manager who just joined the business. So I'm coaching him. It's like, hey, get her engaged in more things that are more management. I know that's where she's going to want to go. At least try it. So create those opportunities intentionally for someone to grow. If you don't, they're going to take what all they've learned and leave. There are sometimes where you can't control it. But by the fact I knew she was getting her MBA and I knew things that she was interested in, I could coach someone to say, hey, these are the opportunities you would be trying to give her so that she can get to that next level and stay interested in what she's doing.
You know, start small too, like you didn't want it to be something that's connected with the work, but you're working on communication and speech. Like I used to have a pretty bad speech impairment. And one of the things I would do is record myself. And I would notice all the like stutters, and I still do a lot of ones. But I would notice each one and then try to re-record and correct it. As well as if you're trying to do leadership stuff, a little lower risk situation could be you gather some friends and do a one-shot D&D campaign, something like that, and then be able to get feedback from them.
And I love that example. And then the other thing is like learning how to do role playing like that. Think about how you're going to train people to be in sales and be a good seller, being able to create those same kind of things. It's the same thing. Or if you're going to teach people customer support or learn those customer problems, it's all the same thing of being able to kind of tell those stories, hear those questions, and provide us the answers.
You don't stay illegal just with DevOps. How do you come to a point where you kind of maxed out your ranks, you go to the staff, consultant, principal, whatever, and you're it. So what if you still want to stay technical, but you want to, well, what's my next step?
Well, I think there's a certain point where as a purely technical individual, you do hit a ceiling. Because you either have to move into a point where you're, I'll call it more of an architect, where you're not directly managing people, but you're indirectly managing because you're providing that entire system overview and making sure the team is doing it, or you have to go down the leadership path. And I think if you can work for Silicon Valley startups, that comps at the higher end of engineering are not that different than management. But if you're working for other businesses that don't have their ability to have profitability not be the key thing that they're focusing on, and support the rest of the business, yeah, you are going to cap out. But it doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad thing. And I think it's also the number of people I've hired who were either leading teams or were running businesses and have decided that's not what they want to do. They want to do something else. That people go back and forth. So neither of them is better or worse than the other. They're just different choices, and you have to decide what is right for you. I run into a ton of engineers who tried managing people, just it was not right for them. The reality is, you can have some people, some employees who work for you, who just make you that being a manager sometimes, because you feel you got to go in a room and say, "Come on, guys, aren't you adults? Come on." Also, you can't do that from a modern HR perspective. It's much more complicated than that now. But there's reasons why you want to stay technical, because you want to be closer, you want to learn the code. And there's nothing wrong with it. You might be able to do more sometimes from a pure revenue, from a consulting perspective in that case. But there's other trade-offs. You can find a consulting firm a little bit. Yeah, as an individual contributor, there are going to be points where you cap out. But in the modern world, they're going to be 6 figure cap. So no, it's not where someone could have a hard time finding a stable chance.
Hey, did you want to extend on that as well?
Yeah, probably is the oldest person. I mean, I've been through all of that stuff. Shannon put up here in my 20s. I've been an executive director since about 30, which is a long time ago. So I guess my point would be, and I've also been saying, that I've helped a lot of people be just really good technical as a manager at a high level. And my point is, it's not like I've worked like 1 or 2 years ago. That's what I was. It's more like 7 years. My point is, I always sought out the best managers. Not always the toughest people. Either taking off hardest or worse than. I always sought those guys out because they helped me. And I did them. I think that there's an ecosystem there with technology. It's a little bit. It's like a guild or something, where, or a union, where people really respect each other for what they actually do. It's as much bad as it is like, it's different. So my point would be, you don't like what you have, but the hardest part is this is the truth. I have moved into that. And some people just can't do it. And at times I get there, I'm taking care of parents with their lives and stuff like that. But if you can figure out a way to go for something, you can like this. Okay. That's what you gotta do. You gotta really be proactive, and nobody's gonna like do it for you. Whether it's you kept going into sales, which is something I did in my 20s, or like when I was in Accenture, I was a partner with Concord. One story, but I decided I was done at some point, and back in engineering, not only but they had come from Accenture, funding me like in engineering. Full circle, and and then I met this guy over here. So, you know, my point is that you gotta take control of it. You know, my first technical job was typing documentation for robots, for the space shuttle. Right? So, I mean, you know, it wasn't like, it was just nothing. It was, I wasn't, you know, I was doing, I later got into programming. But my point is that the bill says our documentation, absolutely true. It's certainly happened more. I've been documenting for 30 years, right? And robot projects, the little garage kind of environment that was making robots back then. So my point is, I think there are many ways to go. I think Shannon gave you a roadmap of different paths to take. Try a couple, see if they work for you. I can tell you that local companies have a tendency to think more about stuff like Ben was saying about encouraging people to get certifications and stuff like that. Local companies, although the big companies have all the money to do that, the local companies care a little bit more about the people in the community. So, you know, that's where I started. But I would say for those that just want to be engineers, you really do need to help each other. Like if you could be the person that helps everybody at the learning perspective, or Frank Lowe, salary increase. It's just not that. It's just that everybody knows it. So find a way to help. Always put your hand up to do the demo day presentation, or you know, the retrospective presentation, right? I mean, those are, it's not thankless, it's your opportunity to get out and meet in a friendly spot like that. In an environment where you know everybody, I mean, what's the word you think about? It's the head of the something, demo doesn't work. I'm tell you, he's not kidding when he says he has this data that makes all demos great. I've seen him do it to me more than I can to, but, you know, I do think you guys have, it's a great time to be doing this stuff. It's really cool things for all of us, find ways to help and do other things that advance our careers and do it. I'm hearing what your elevator pitch is for why DevOps is the coolest tech field to go into.
Because it is what allows everything else that people think is cool, actually. It's that simple, right? If you're using WhatsApp, if you're using Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn or any of the tools that people use, internet websites or Twitch or Xbox Live or Switch or whatever, it absolutely makes all those work. Right? There's the application people build, but it's all the infrastructure and the ability to automate and manage that at scale that makes it all possible. And if you don't have that,
This guy, if you want to be the person that saves everything, like when there's something really wrong, you can handle it. It's a great job. It's a great, you are the savior, right? The challenge is every day.
It's a blast from the past, but Scott Andreessen, one of the Netscape founders, wrote an article 15 years ago called Software Doing World. And basically he was saying that organizations that adopt a DevOps philosophy will outcompete and run into the ground every organization that does not adopt a DevOps philosophy. And to take it an extent further, every company, regardless of what they do, is a software company. And so if you sell paint, if you sell cars, if you were in a tech facility, right? If you repair engines, like you have to have a website. You have to have a website to connect with people, to tell what to do, all of that kind of stuff. And if your job is working with the engines or building the parts or meeting with people to work the deals, you need someone who does the DevOps.
To your point about software eating the book, right? Let's just go to a little thing, because you guys are at Delta. Remember what happened with CrowdStrike and Delta a couple months ago? Remember what happened with the other airlines that did have DevOps and were able to recover? That's the difference if you don't have. That's the one sentence pitch, the elevator pitch. If you do it right, your company stays running and you're competitive. If you do it wrong, you end up pointing figures with CrowdStrike. All of them.
And for what it's worth, I happen to be in the same field as CrowdStrike. They're one of my competitors. We may bank on the fact that they screwed up very well.
We had to fix a bunch of CrowdStrike stuff. And it's a scramble because we're a managed service provider, so we don't, some of the automation is not there.
Yeah.
So, we literally were midnight, we were fixing windows, restoring windows, deleting the file that caused it all, and getting it all back up one at a time.
My favorite tip that came out of the whole thing was, for those of you who use Windows and BitLocker, printed out as a QR code, and then the USB barcode scanner, instead of keying in that 32-digit tag. It's so stupid it works. It's not stupid.
Well, I think we're about out of time, a little over, but, thank you, Shannon and Ben, for great presentations and, providing the food, and, now let's get this round of applause. Save them later, we've got lots of pizza left, so,
And drinks.
and drinks now.
So do you like your folding phone? Is that the Google Pixel or?
It's the Samsung phone. So I like it. It's been my favorite phone. Bring your Kubeflow thing in there. So they can take a picture.